Braden Point, like you mentioned, Mikko Rantanen. Mitch Marner's name has been mentioned sparingly in this market. But to me, he's not even the most fascinating RFA name out there. It's just it seems pretty standard. There's a gap in what he thinks he should be making and what the Leafs think he should be making. The guy who's the most interesting to me is Patrik Laine, and haven't really heard anything for a while. How do you think that's going to end? Because I'm not convinced it's going to end with him as a Jet.
I think it will. I think that's one of those situations where I would expect there to have been a lot more smoke than there's been if there was a situation in which he wasn't. He was going to be at loggerheads with them, and they would have to move him at some point. I mean, the Jets right now, I think, have to do everything in their power to ensure that he's going to be there in the next few years, just because of a slight downtick, I think, in quality of their blue line, and maybe the thought that if anything, they might have to take a step back before moving forward. I expect he'll still be there, but nothing shocking, and maybe the lack of news is more indicative of the market than anything else.
Greg Wyshynski is a senior hockey writer for ESPN. He's with us on Sportsnet Today, Sportsnet 590 The Fan.
We were talking about teams, how are we going to be able to keep the great young players that we draft, but we've completely glossed over great young players that we acquired by fleecing Peter Chiarelli. And on that note, the New Jersey Devils have basically, it seems like 1 year to convince Taylor Hall to stay a New Jersey Devil. Heading into the season, I guess still in the dead of the offseason, how do you like their chances? Because they've made some improvements this offseason.
I came into the summer thinking it was 60-40. I think it's still maybe it's up to 65-35 if they keep him. The bottom line is that this is a team that's going to be a lot better, and right now has some of the building blocks of a championship contender that you need. Two great centers, top flight defensemen. They don't have the goalie at all right now. I'm not a huge Mackenzie Blackwood fan necessarily. But the thing about Taylor Hall is that I think he loves the organization. I think he feels appreciated by the organization. He clearly was enthusiastic about bringing PK Subban to New Jersey. But the question is how far away are the Devils from winning a cup? Because this is the game for Taylor Hall right now. He wants to win a Stanley Cup. And if it's not going to be with the Devils because they simply don't have the depth of talent. They've got some high-end talent, but they don't have the depth of talent. Then it'll be somewhere else. And, they're going to do their due diligence to try to convince this guy to stick around and be the face of the franchise along with Jack Hughes. But it remains to be seen. It's a process. He's not wavered from what he said after the season. But that's still a little bit disconcerting if you're a Devils fan, I think.
So there's the team that he's on and will hopefully stay with, I'm sure, if you're one Greg Wyshynski. Then there's the team that he came from in the Edmonton Oilers. And what we were sort of talking about, well, what I was ranting about on the podcast anyway, at the end of the season, because the Oilers, I recently watched some Oilers highlights from April because that's what I do in July. And that team could not wait to get off the ice. And I just looked at what they've done this offseason, besides the front office moves that Ken Holland made, which I'm actually on board with. They signed Marcus Granlund, like not even the best Granlund. They swapped goalies with the Flames. They got Mike Smith to go with Mikko Koskinen. Let's pretend this is it. This is all the Oilers end up doing. And let's pretend that they have basically the same season that they did last year, because to be frank, there's no reason to really assume that it'll be different. They got a 50-goal season out of Leon Draisaitl, and we're still terrible. Can you imagine an NHL where Connor McDavid requests a trade? Yes, I am being that guy.
Sure. I mean, why not, right? Like, if I know that he's talked about the, commitment to the franchise with the contract and the whole thing. But you could very much see him saying, I can't do this anymore. Now, the question is, is that a cool thing to do if you're Connor McDavid? And I know that there's a certain mindset out there of like being like, well, he's wasting away in Edmonton. He's just, the career is flittering away because of the ineptitude of management. And if nothing else, the inaction this summer, I think, is the greatest example of how Peter Chiarelli completely screwed up that team during his time there than anything else. But at the end of the day, you signed the franchise player contract, right? Like, you committed to the franchise. You said through thick and through thin, I'm going to see this thing through. And I know that the argument is, well, look at the roster when he signed that deal. And I'm like, yeah, but he signed a deal. Like, he could have done more of a Matthews deal and said 5 years. He didn't. He went long term with them. So there's a part of me that will be completely sympathetic to Connor McDavid because you are the best player in the world, and no one can watch you after April 15th because you're never in the playoffs. But there's another part of me that's like, you know what? Maybe honor your commitment. If you're going to say that you're the franchise guy, you kind of have to see this thing through. And that's your lot in life. That's the decision that you made.
With Greg Wyshynski of ESPN. So let's pretend, Greg, that Ken Holland is the guy in Edmonton who actually does whatever it is that needs to be done correctly. Can't promise that. I mean, God knows they've tried with others. But how long does this take? Given that you have the best player in the game, if Ken Holland does this right, how long do you think it takes?
God, I mean, if you look at that roster right now and the near total lack of quality offensive depth that they have on it, they've got a few okay pieces on the blue line, but the goaltending is specious at best. I mean, are we looking at like 3 years? I mean, it's a daunting task. I will say that they have a ton of money coming off the cap. I think next summer. I'm looking at Cap Friendly right now, and they have in the neighborhood of $24 million in open cap space. But the problem is that they only have 10 players signed through the 2021 season. So it's like you got some cap space, but you're so top heavy as far as your cap goes that you need to spend it to fill out your roster. So if nothing else, Kenny Holland will have the opportunity to put his stamp on the team with so many players that are up. The question is it's still being Edmonton, and it's still being a team that doesn't necessarily have a bevy of tradable assets to acquire other players. What's that process going to look like? It is a mountain to climb if you're Ken Holland because of the way that Peter Chiarelli strip mined this roster for bad trades and made some horrible signings and handed out no move clauses that are just idiotic in retrospect. But he's I still think he's a smart hockey man. I don't think that the world's passed him by. I just think that this is an enormous task for anybody to try to figure out because of how completely messed up that cap is and how messed up that team is.
I'm definitely with you that it's completely messed up, and they're my obsession right now. I feel like the Leafs were awful for so long that it just became my thing to try to figure out how to fix broken teams. And so I basically moved on to the Oilers. The thing that gets me and why I'm always afraid to write them off and say, oh yeah, it's going to take 3 years or whatever, is to me, what they lack is the most plentiful resource in the NHL, which is wingers. Like it's amazing to me they can't find wingers to play with, have Draisaitl down the middle, have McDavid down the middle. If they wanted to, if they just got some wingers who were competent, they could have all three of those guys play center in McDavid, Draisaitl, and Nugent Hopkins if they wanted. So it scares me to write them off for too long because I just think when you have the best player in the world, you've always got a shot, right?
Yeah, in theory. I think my issue with Draisaitl is that I don't know if he can be Malkin to Connor's Sid quite yet. I don't necessarily know if he's proven that yet. And I think that it's obvious that his best offensive output has been coming while on the wing of Connor McDavid. And so you're paying him $8.5 million a season or whatever it is in that neighborhood to be a top-line winger, which is fine. I mean, the guy pops 50 goals. I mean, that's a very valuable commodity. Problem being is that you drafted him to be Malkin. So I don't necessarily know if it's just a matter of can we get Leon the wingers that he needs versus can Leon be that guy for us, which I think is the real issue. Well, one of a billion issues, but one of the real issues there. It'd be like if the Devils, drafted Jack Hughes to be the center with Nico Hischier for the next, 8 years, and then all of a sudden all the prognostications about him having to play the wing come true. Well, it kind of, hurts your development as a roster that all of a sudden the franchise center that you think you have becomes a franchise top-line winger. And I think that's part of the Oilers' problem right now is that, in theory, it should be a line anchored by Draisaitl, a line anchored by McDavid, and you go to war with that, but it's not been the case for the last 2 years.